Hey everyone, welcome back to College Mind's YouTube channel. Before we get started today, remember to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our helpful videos. And if you find this video in particular helpful, we would love it if you clicked the like button below and shared it with your friends on social media. Let's dive into today's topic. In this video, we're talking about test optional schools. Questions about these schools are coming up more and more often for us at College Mind as more colleges establish optional or flexible testing policies. Students who struggle with standardized tests or who don't have the time or resources to prepare for them may be particularly interested to learn that there are actually lots of great schools that you can get into without having an SAT or an ACT score. So in this video, we'll cover exactly what test optional means, how these policies impact college admissions, and which top schools do have optional or flexible testing policies. So let's dive right in with what does it mean to be a test optional school? Well, test optional schools are pretty much exactly what they sound like. Their applications for admission do not require standardized SAT or ACT scores. Submitting those scores with your application is completely optional. Then there are also test flexible schools. This means that while an SAT or ACT score might not be required, they would like to see some sort of standardized test score from you. It might be an AP or an IB exam or an SAT subject test. The exact policy at each test flexible school varies, so you need to research the schools on your list to make sure that you understand the specific testing policy at each one of the ones that you're interested in. More than 1,000 colleges and universities in the US, both public and private schools, consider themselves test optional or test flexible. It's not a new phenomenon. For instance, Bowdoin first went test optional in 1969, but it's becoming increasingly common to see a school dropping testing requirements in favor of weighting other aspects of the application a bit more heavily, like activities or your grades. So, how do test optional policies impact college admissions? Well, as more and more schools embrace holistic admissions practices, the number of test optional or test flexible schools also climbs. It's because many of these schools are aiming to remove barriers to admission and ultimately increase diversity in their applicant pools. Standardized tests do often favor wealthy students over lower income students, so removing standardized tests as a requirement can open doors to students who may not have the resources to pay for the test itself, let alone prep classes or additional sittings if their first score wasn't great. This is in addition to, of course, larger systemic barriers that affect low-income students in ways that wealthy students just won't be affected. Removing these barriers can, in theory, start to close that gap by increasing access to higher education for students who may otherwise be unable to access it. However, some schools have been accused of going test optional or test flexible just to increase their applicant pools and thus decrease their acceptance rate. This strategy could lead to a higher ranking in certain college lists. Because removing the test score requirement can encourage many students to apply for your school who may not have otherwise, lowering the barriers tends to do that, test optional schools can see a huge increase in the number of applicants who are not at the academic level that the school typically admits. This means that they have a much larger applicant pool to choose from, but they're still going to admit the same number of students. They haven't necessarily built more dorms or increased class capacity. Keep in mind that they also admit the same level of students. Whether or not there's a test score on file, the application committee keeps the same standards for every applicant. It just means that every other part of the application is looked at even more closely, particularly other evidence of your scholastic ability like grades, your class rank, or course selection. So, in light of all of this information, should you submit your SAT scores to a test optional school? Well, as we've just talked about, test optional schools haven't necessarily relaxed their admission standards. They're still looking for students who are academically capable, and there are many different ways of showing this in your application. If your grades are top-notch and you've taken a really difficult course load, but you happened to really bomb it on the SAT, a test optional school is probably a great choice for you, and in that case, you probably shouldn't submit your test scores. That said, if you're a decent student but your grades aren't exceptional, you should consider how your test scores stack up to those of accepted students, even at test optional schools. If your test scores fall in the top 50% of accepted students, you should probably submit them even if the school is test optional. Your scores are still going to be considered, and they can help to support your application by further showcasing your scholastic aptitude. Once again, particularly if your grades aren't necessarily stellar. If test taking has always been a weak spot, but you shine in the classroom and in activities, or if you're from an underserved population, then going test optional can be a great way to increase your application options. But if your test scores are on par with the rest of your academics, you're better off submitting them. The more information that you're able to supply about yourself, the more data that the admissions committee can use to make their decision. Also keep in mind that Some scholarships and financial aid packages are determined by your standardized test scores, so applying without them might jeopardize your eligibility for those other programs. Right about now, you might be asking which schools actually are test optional. Well, there are a lot of schools that are test optional, and many of them are top schools. Test optional and test flexible national universities ranked in the top 50 by US News and World Report include this list. There are even more top liberal arts schools that have adopted test optional and test flexible policies. Here's a list of liberal arts schools in the top 50 that are test optional or test flexible. For more information about test optional schools, including a list of every single test optional and test flexible school in the top 100, check out the blog post we've linked below in the comments. Or for more general guidance on applying to college, visit CollegeVine online at app.collegevine.com. That's all for today. Thank you, as always, for visiting us here at the CollegeVine YouTube channel. And if you're applying to college this season, best of luck.